Today we are going to discuss mainly about cornea collagen cross-linking for keratoconus and what are the different types of collagen cross-linking and what are the advantages and disadvantages. So, so by the end of this class, once I will finish this class, I hope most of you would be able to describe a brief summary of keratoconus, more in terms of C3R or collagen cross-linking, also called in short as a CXL, and also able to explain the types of different types of CXL that currently in use, and maybe able to summarize some of the steps and that has been done during this CXL process, and also able to describe 5 complications of CXL process and what are the indication of CXL process. So these are the 5 learning objectives. I hope most of you will be able to summarize or explain all those things that is written there uh, once I will finish with this lecture, and I will also ask at the end. So for most of you, there would be a lot of new terms that is going to come in into this talk. So I suggest everyone to please have a pen and copy to note those points so that by in the end we can discuss those things. Just one. So why we need cornea collagen cross linking? So most of the time, or almost 99% of the time, it is for the ectatic diseases, and one of the most common ectatic disease is keratoconus. So this is just only a summary, a brief about keratoconus. So one of the thing about the keratoconus is that it is one of the commonest reason because of which people go for the corneal transplant in the developing countries. That might not be true for India, but for the developing countries like USA and European countries, Australia, UK, all those things. So what is keratoconus? We all know that keratoconus is a non-inflammatory. Most of the time, it is asymmetric. So most of the time, there would be keratoconus in both eyes, but not in a same severity. One eye would be mild, other eye would be having moderate or advanced, and that results into corneal thinning, and that causes irregular corneal shape, and that leads to irregular astigmatism, and eventually because of all those things it causes decrease in vision, severe decrease in vision. There are a lot of factors that has been attributed for keratoconus, so that can be described into two main categories. One is the environmental factors and other is the genetic factors. So we know less about genetic factors, but we know more about environmental factors that cause keratoconus, like atopic diseases or allergic diseases, rubbing eyes, all those things. And it has been seen that it usually start in the second or third decade of life. So normally you will see a patient reporting keratoconus, they would be in their 20s or in their 30s, so something like that. So actually what happens in keratoconus, so normally the cornea is a very regular shape. Uh, so in keratoconus, the cornea becomes more steeper as we see in this diagram, and because of that the cornea will become irregular, and because of this steepening, there are different layers in the cornea, and would be stretching or stress on the all layers of the cornea. And this is how a person with keratoconus see the things. So just to give a representing picture that how it appears to them. So this is how we see an object, people with a normal vision. And this is how a person with keratoconus with mild stage will see. So that you are seeing a lot of shadowing. That is because of the astigmatism. But what happens when it goes to the moderate or severe stage? So the same alphabet, uh, we are not able to make out anything, and that happens same with the people with moderate to severe stage of keratoconus. They can see things are there, but the exact the quality of the vision is very poor. So that's why keratoconus is severely visually cause severe visual impairment. Going back to the epidemiology of keratoconus. So keratoconus, since last 2 days we are discussing about myopia, like how it's increasing. Keratoconus is also one disease that literature, that is studies have shown that it's also increasing. So like one study that was done in 1959 by Hofstra. So in that study, that was the first study where they have tried to report the prevalence of keratoconus by using Placido disc, and there they have reported a prevalence of 600. So persons affected with a keratoconus in every 1 lakh population. Now coming back to 2015, 2009, a study done in India, central India. So the current prevalence is in India is about 2,300 per 1 lakh population. So it's like significant increase. So there are many reasons for increase in the prevalence of keratoconus. One of the reason could be nowadays we have a better modality for screening keratoconus so that we can uh, also screen the people at very early stages of the disease. That might be one reason we see more prevalence nowadays. And this prevalence vary from place to place. So suppose in India, the places which are their environment, their temperature is more cold, there you will see a less prevalence of keratoconus. In those area which are dry, humid, so there you will see more higher prevalence of keratoconus. So this is a one worldwide map where it is showing the prevalence. So like 5%, 4%. So the more red, that is showing the more severity of prevalence. So India, if you see, it comes under 2.5 to 3% of the prevalence. So if you think about the population of India, it's very high. The number of people suffering from keratoconus is quite high. Though almost every study has showing or reported a high prevalence in the Middle East countries, like Gulf countries, they are having the highest prevalence of keratoconus. Again, going back to the epidemiology, like these are the reasons for which people or a person go for corneal transplant. So in India, is still the people who go for corneal transplant is very less because of the keratoconus. But if you see the chart, the developing countries like New Zealand or this study basically done in the UK. So there, the main reason for corneal transplant is the keratoconus. And there are a lot of studies which also have shown where also have studied where it has affected more male or female. So though this particular study, the reference here given is done in 2016, they are showing the prevalence is more in male. But there are also studies which are showing like equal prevalence in male and female. But almost all studies are showing a slight more prevalence in males than females. So we all know how we diagnose keratoconus. So one is on the basis of symptoms. So patients with keratoconus will have report more worsening of vision with time, frequent change in refraction, and we'll see a progressive increase in the astigmatism. Like every 3 months or 6 months, you will see a significant increase in astigmatism and oblique axis. The second very important tool is the corneal topography, and Pentacam is nowadays a gold standard. So what Pentacam does, it almost scan 1,38,000 points of the corneal surface. And that's how it's very highly sensitive tool to diagnose keratoconus even in the very early initial stage of disease. Even the subclinical keratoconus we can diagnose with the help of pentacam. So subclinical means those keratoconus which are still not manifested, and also we use that for track the progression. And clinical signs, so we know about like uh, scissor reflex and then Vox striae and those other signs. So the problem with the clinical signs is that they mostly appear at very later stages of the disease. So if you totally rely on the clinical signs, so we might miss disease in its keratoconus disease in its early stages. So symptoms or corneal topography is a better tool for diagnosing keratoconus. So what do we do for the keratoconus management? So first and foremost thing is that you always have to explain this point always to the patient and don't rub eyes because it has been shown that it leads to the progression of keratoconus and also can lead to the hydrops, which is basically the scarring, which eventually leads to the severe scarring of the cornea, and the patient has to go for the corneal transplant. And the other management is the corneal collagen cross-linking. That is the main topic of today class that I would be discussing in a moment. Then other management option is the intrastromal corneal rings. So intrastromal corneal ring is that if you see in this diagram, there is a ring that is placed on the cornea. So if you can understand with this picture, so what happens in a keratoconus, the cornea is a very steep. So suppose this is a cornea, it is a very steep. So what these intact rings does, it stretches cornea. So it makes cornea a little bit flatter. So that's how this intact ring are used to improve the visual acuity in keratoconus patients by decreasing the amount of astigmatism, and it has been approved by FDA also. Other management, contact lenses, we all don't know. We have all kind of contact lenses, RGP, ROSK, piggyback, and then of course corneal transplant. In that we have DALK and PK. So see, if you go to the management part, so it goes step by step. First option, you have a corneal collagen cross-linking intacs. So sometimes corneal collagen cross-linking and intacs both are done simultaneously. Though there are many consultant surgeons which do not prefer intrastromal corneal rings because several disadvantages that is associated with intacs. So means in our clinical scenario, the whenever a patient we diagnose with a keratoconus, the approach of management will be look for the collagen cross-linking, whether that patient is suitable for not. If it is suitable, then go for the corneal collagen cross-linking. Then for visual improvement, contact lenses should be given. And if contact lenses cannot be given and if C3R cannot be done, then the corneal transplant is the only option. So this is only a very short video that is to show that how eye rubbing leads to the progression of keratoconus. If you see this MRI, this is MRI video is showing how rubbing does not only affect the cornea, it's also affecting the whole eye globe. And if a person rubbing their eyes, so over a period of time, it eventually leads to the some abnormality of the cornea. Sometimes also can have also have been seen problem with IOP, those people who are frequent rubbing their eyes. So that's why it's become very important for us to tell our all patients who are having keratoconus. So even they have undergone C3R or using contact lenses, eye rubbing is something they should be avoided at all cost. Now coming to the corneal collagen cross-linking. So what is this corneal collagen cross-linking is all about? So it is not a very old technology. So So it was first described by Spoll and their colleagues in their research paper in 1998 as a modality which can be used to halt the progression of, or which can be used to strengthening of cornea. And it was in 2003 where it was actually demonstrated or shown by Valensek et al. In through their study that actually C3R could they have done in certain number of patients, and they have shown the efficacy of C3R in corneal strengthening. So actually it is 2003 when it has introduced in clinical practice. And very recent in 2016, the US FDA has given approval for the corneal collagen cross-linking. So if you see, this technology is still very new. It is not, so it is only started in 2003 and 2016 only FDA has given approval. So now it's 2020. So it's about 17, 18 years old technology. So in medicines, anything 17, 18 years cannot be considered as a very old technology. So what we do in actually C3R or corneal collagen cross-linking, also written as a CXL, riboflavin has been used, that is basically vitamin B2. It is administered in conjunction with the ultraviolet radiation. So ultraviolet A, 365 nanometer, that's wavelength. So this is the ultraviolet that normally present in our environment. So when you go in the sunlight also having this ultraviolet A. So once we are doing C3R or CXL with riboflavin using ultraviolet A radiation, it is not discomforting to the patient because this is the ultraviolet that is also we see that is normally found in the sunlight. So why vitamin B2 or riboflavin is used? So riboflavin has been shown to increase the efficacy of ultraviolet radiations to strengthening the cornea, and that's why riboflavin has been used. So the interaction of riboflavin and UVA radiation leads to the formation of reactive oxygen species, which lead to the formation of additional covalent bonds between the collagen molecules with conjugate biomechanical stiffening of the cornea. So this is the picture where you are showing, this is the cornea without C3R or before C3R. And this red bars are actually the covalent bonds. So once C3R or CXL has been done, so we are seeing several new covalent bonds has been developed in the corneal stroma. And that's how it gives a strengthening to the cornea. In the present scenario, since the first time 2003 it has been introduced to till now, various advances have introduced over the period of time to basically optimize the CXL procedure efficacy and refractive outcomes. So what are these? These include basically new riboflavin formulations with higher ultraviolet A irradiance sources and programmable UVA patterns. What are these things? I will discuss in a moment. So what are the different types of CXL? So once I was saying that over the period of time, several new modification has been introduced in CXL. So those modifications were in the terms of ultraviolet radiation. Basic component is the same. Basic component is their riboflavin and ultraviolet A radiation. What does they have changed over the period of time is that riboflavin formulation or concentration of riboflavin that has been used. And other thing is that ultraviolet radiation, irradiance means amount of radiation that has been given to the cornea during the procedure. So by uh, that, there has been come up with different types of this C3R process, and that can be termed as a conventional or a standard cross-linking procedure. Second is the accelerated cross-linking, and and uh, uh, and one of the advanced type of accelerated cross-linking is accelerated with pulsed cross-linking, and then transepithelial cross-linking and cross-linking in thin cornea. So I will discuss one by one what are they. So before moving further, I will just show you a small video which basically is showing that how C3R process is done. It's very simple process, but a time-taking process. So just show the video, then I will discuss. This process is the first process, the standard C3R or the conventional C3R that is shown in this video.
Now with corneal cross-linking, we have a way to actually halt, or at the very least, slow down the progression of this disease. The basic concept of corneal cross-linking is using a solution called riboflavin and combining it with UV light to strengthen the bonds in the cornea to make it stronger. If the cornea is stronger, then it won't continue to bulge out. This procedure involves three main steps. Step number one is removing the corneal epithelium because the riboflavin solution has to penetrate. This takes less than a minute. The next 30 minutes, the riboflavin solution is applied to the surface of the eye every 2 minutes for a total of 30 minutes. The last 30 minutes, the same thing is done where the riboflavin solution is applied to the surface of the eye every 2 minutes, but in addition, there's the UV light that's also placed right above the patient's eye. So actively, those covalent bonds are being formed. After the end of the procedure, we put a contact lens on to allow the corneal epithelium to regrow in the days to come.
So these are the, this is a very short video about the like procedure of C3R. So if you see, there are just 3 steps. First step is to remove the epithelium, so that riboflavin can penetrate into the stroma. And then after removing the cornea, the riboflavin has been put on the cornea in every 2 minutes gap for the 30 minutes, means 15 times. And after 30 minutes, they will again put the riboflavin after every 2 minutes gap, but with UV radiations. So that is the third step. So total, if you see, it is a 1 hour process. So it is basically nothing. It's very simple process. And this is what is done in the like standard C3R process. So till now, anything you people want to clarify or ask? I should continue. Okay, so nothing. So I will now going to discuss one by one about those 4 procedures of C3R or CXL. So conventional, already you have seen in the video. So in conventional, what we see basically, so first the corneal epithelium has been removed, about 9 mm diameter of the cornea. Then riboflavin has been used for 30 minutes at every 2 minute gap. And there is one small process after that. So once the 30-minute has been over, then corneal thickness measurement repeated, and if less than 400 micrometer, 2 drops of hypotonic riboflavin 0.1% solution will be instilled every 10 to 15 seconds until the corneal thickness becomes 400 micrometer. So it's very important that the corneal thickness should be 400 micrometer even after removal of the corneal epithelium. Why it is so? So that once we apply the UV radiation, it should not reach to the endothelium, because if it reached the endothelium, it will destroy the endothelium cells. So that's why the 400 thickness is optimum requirement. So after that, after 30 minutes of putting riboflavin at a gap of every 2 minutes, the patient eye is positioned under the UV illumination device, taking care to ensure that the beam diameter was within the treatment zone, avoiding the limbal area and a 5 centimeter distance between the beam aperture and the eye. And once the laser UV radiation is started, then also the same process is start. That is two riboflavin solution after every 2 minutes. So one thing here we have to basically keep note of that the radiation, the amount of radiation that has been used, and that is the main difference between the different CXL process that will be discussed in next slides. So here during the illumination process at an irradiance of 3 milliwatt per centimeter square for 30 minutes. So this unit 3 milliwatt per centimeter square is the unit for UV radiations exposure. So in the standard cross-linking procedure, we use that radiation is 3 milliwatt, and sometimes some consultant surgeon also use 9 milliwatt. Going to the second process, that is accelerated cross-linking. The first one is the standard, or also called as a conventional. The second is the accelerated. As the name itself suggesting accelerated means it would be faster than the standard cross-linking procedure. So in accelerated cross-linking, the initial step would be same, that we have to remove the corneal epithelium about 9 mm diameter zone. Then we'll put a riboflavin. So the thing that is here different from conventional is that here the riboflavin would be free from dextran, and that will again instead every 2 minutes for 10 minutes only. So means only 5 times. So after epithelial removal, following which irradiation was conducted at a 30 milliwatt per centimeter square. So the second difference you are seeing here is that the illumination irradiance of UV radiation is quite high. Here it is a 30 milliwatt per centimeter square. In the standard, it is 3 milliwatt, and sometimes 8 milliwatt also has been used. And that is used only for a 4 minute. So if you see the total time here, it is only 14 minutes or 15 minutes in comparison of standard where it is taking 1 hour. So once completed this radiation process, bandage contact lens was applied. So it is same in standard and accelerated also. Why we need to put a BCL? Since we are removing the epithelium, so we need to put a BCL so that patient, so if you're not putting BCL, so the patient would be having a lot of pain because of the epithelial defect. And then in the follow-up visit, the patient will be started on the topical antibiotic as well as steroids for a month time in a tapering dose. So this is a table which is showing basically the difference between the conventional or standard and accelerated cross-linking procedure. So these are the protocols. Removal of epithelium that would be there in both. Riboflavin solution, the basic difference would be here in accelerated, it is dextran free. In the conventional, it is isotonic riboflavin. Duration of soak means duration of putting riboflavin here after every 2 minutes, here also every 2 minutes, but for 30 minutes duration, here 10 minutes duration. And illumination protocol here is 3 milliwatt and here is a 30 milliwatt. Also note in conventional cross-linking, some machines also use 8 milliwatt, 10 milliwatt, 9 milliwatt also. in this standard. Pulsed cross-linking, it is a kind of extension of the accelerated. So in pulsed cross-linking, sufficient penetration of riboflavin, UVA irradiation and presence of oxygen lead effective stromal cross-linking. So what is happening in the accelerated cross-linking? We are seeing a very like less amount of time for which the patient exposed to the UV radiation, and also the amount of riboflavin like exposure putting riboflavin is also very less duration. So one thing has been noted that when we are putting this radiation, so because of that there would be I mean, fast depletion of oxygen that would be there. So in the pulsed cross-linking, so what happened, there would be pulsed delivery of UV radiation, means the radiation would be not continuous. It would be in a pulse manner, means it would be there for few seconds, and then it will be stopped. Then again it will be start. So pulse delivery of UV radiation with a predetermined on and off pattern enable better diffusion of oxygen into the stroma and a subsequent greater effect. And there are numerous studies which compare the result of continuous versus burst in the accelerated protocol of C3R. And they found that a deeper demarcation line and higher effect were noted with pulsed approach. So what is this demarcation line and higher effect? I will discuss in later slides. So just to give you an idea what a demarcation line. So if you can see this, here is if you can see here is a demarcation line. There is a very fine demarcation line. This demarcation line is very important to tell that what is the extent of C3R or CXL treatment. So more about this demarcation line I will discuss in later slides. So that was that is what demarcation line. If you see here the demarcation line, so here it is a very fine demarcation line, this part. So here demarcation line is showing 0.26 mm, means 260 micrometer. So deeper the demarcation line, it consider that better the treatment. And the third type of CXL is the transepithelial cross-linking. Now, what is the meaning of transepithelial? Transepithelial means through epithelium. Means in the early two process, one is the standard and other is the accelerated. What we are seeing that we have to remove the epithelium. So why we need to remove the epithelium? To better absorption of the riboflavin into the stroma. But removal of epithelium in itself is a like can create issues like corneal infection, patient pain, sometimes also can cause corneal scar. All those possibilities are there. So they are come up with a new process or new like extension of cross-linking process that is called transepithelial cross-linking. So there what they have did, they have developed process through which riboflavin could be transmitted into the stroma without need of removal of epithelium. And that process is called ionotophoresis. Ionotophoresis is a process of, it is a basically non-invasive technique that allows transepithelial riboflavin penetration following application of a mild electric current. So it is a process so by which they transmit riboflavin into the stroma without removal of the epithelium. But there are studies which are showing that transepithelial approach, though demonstrated fewer complications, but their efficacy is low as compared with the accelerated or conventional treatment. So that's why not very preferred technique, because their efficacy is not as good. So in this diagram or in this picture, we can see that so the epithelium is intact, and how you'll know that riboflavin. So in the blue light, riboflavin appear as a fluorescein. So here you are seeing it is not fluorescein, actually it is a riboflavin. So it is penetrated into the stroma without removing epithelium. So how cross-linking can be done in a thin cornea? So why this uh, thing come like cross-linking in a thin cornea? So there is a requirement for a CXL, corneal cross-linking, that corneal thickness should be 400 micrometer. Uh, some consultants, some literature says at 380 micrometer also can be considered, but 400, but most of the literature agree on 400 micrometer. So this is the minimal corneal thickness, 400 micrometer, falling epithelial debridement. That should be there to do the cross-linking. Why this thickness required? So as I said in my earlier slides also, that we need this much thickness to limit the UV radiation to reach to the endothelium. You don't want UV radiation to reach to the endothelium, because it can cause damage to the endothelial cells. And we know that once endothelial cell will be damaged, it cannot grow. So most often keratoconus patients have thin corneas below 400 microns, and make them not suitable for traditional cross-linking. But what happens in the keratoconus, like most of the time they diagnose late, and we see corneal thickness like most of the time less than 400 micron, and there we cannot do the traditional or accelerated cross-linking. So various techniques have been described to overcome these limitations. So what are those techniques? So one is that installation of hypotonic riboflavin to increase the corneal hydration and thickness intraoperatively. Second is the use of a riboflavin soaked bandaged contact lens to augment the corneal thickness by roughly 100 micron. But long-term studies using these techniques have demonstrated that unsatisfactory results. And for present time, still many surgeons will not prefer to do cross-linking in thin corneas, because we're still not very sure of the efficacy of, like, the main purpose of doing C3R to improve the stiffness of the cornea. But the studies showing that even if you're doing the C3R in thin corneas using these techniques, still the efficacy are not good. The keratoconus is still progressing. So those were the standard C3R or CXL process. There are other use of CXL process also. So nowadays there is a LASIK called extra LASIK. So what they do LASIK with C3R. So this is for those patients who are having corneal thickness less than 480 microns. So normally 480 microns is the like minimum requirement for do the LASIK. So if you're doing LASIK for a patient who is having corneal thickness less than 480, so chances are that those patient will develop ectasia after LASIK. So to prevent this ectasia, so they do LASIK with C3R. So that is called laser in situ keratomyelitis extra. Then I already have discussed Intacs intrastromal corneal ring done, and most of the time it is done with the C3R. There are studies that is going on scleral cross-linking to restrict the axial myopia. Or make so we see in the myopia, actually in the progressive myopia, the sclera become thin or weak. So to strengthen the sclera, this technique also can be used. Then also C3R has been used in infective keratitis, because this C3R or UV radiation is also having phototoxicity effect. So it can also cause bactericidal effect, and there also it has been used, especially in those infection that is not responding to the medicines. So that was all about the different C3R process. Now, this is one additional point that is not process, that is more relevant for us when we are examining a patient who has undergone C3R in our clinics. So what we have to do, we have to look for this demarcation line. So I don't know how many of you can appreciate there is a very fine, high reflective line you see in the stroma. Uh, most of you can see this line in this diagram. Yes, no, no.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So
sir.
okay, so what you have to do whenever you are seeing a patient who has undergone C3R or CXL. So after CXL, collagen cross-linking in ectatic eyes, there is a photochemical reaction because of the UV radiation and riboflavin. And these induce cross links in the cornea and can be detected through a structural changes that is secondary to the cornea collagen cross linking. So what is that structural change? This appear as a demarcation line, DL, or called stromal DL in slit lamp examination. And it can be seen much better in a anterior segment OCT. And there are studies which hypothesize or which says that the role of the demarcation line, this demarcation line after CXL depth as a representative of CXL effectiveness. So if that demarcation line is deeper, quite deep in the stroma, say 320 or 340 microns, means the C3R is very effective because it is actually done at the level where it should be done in the stroma. So demarcation line is basically a transition zone between the cross-linked stroma and untreated tissue. So here the demarcation line. So before that, all the tissue that is treated, and below that, those tissue are not treated with C3R radiation. Hyperreflectivity that we see in the demarcation line is due to different refractive indices in the corneal stroma between treated and untreated tissues, and considered as a corneal stroma demarcation line as a clinical sign to evaluate the depth of the CXL treatment. So this is the anterior segment picture of cornea undergone C3R. So if you see in the first picture, this picture. So here, if you see here, we see a demarcation line in this area. And we can measure this demarcation line with OCT, anterior segment OCT. So here it is showing a demarcation line of 314 micrometer. So we have to check at the center, because in the center we want to see. In the periphery, of course, it would be less. So in the center is the important. And this is the another tissue. So this is the ASOCT of a catechinous eye 6 months after EP of corneal cross-linking. Radiation with a UVA 3 milliwatt centimeter square. And this is the ASOCT catechinous 6 months after accelerated cross-linking with 10 milliwatt centimeter square. So here in accelerated mode, we are seeing a less penetration. Demarcation line is at 271 micrometer, but in a standard one, we are seeing a higher demarcation line. So higher means it's better than accelerated. So more the penetration, more it's better. But this is debatable. Some people will not agree after this. So that was all about the C3R. Now coming back to like when to go for C3R, when to advise a patient for C3R. So there are three main indications. So first indication would be always progressive keratoconus. A keratoconus, what is a progressive? Even if it is the patient is adult beyond 30 years of age, but it's still if the progression keratoconus is progressing, we have to go for C3AR if the corneal thickness is 400 or more than 400 microns. Young age. So if the child is coming with a keratoconus and we don't have data to support that whether it is a progressing or not progressing, but in child we know that it is going to progress. So in young age, in children, we do C3R irrespective of whether we have evidence for progression or not. And management of many corneal ectasia problems like keratoglobus and similar problems. So this is one table which is showing that when we say that a keratoconus is progressive. So this is like parameter. If the steepest keratometry from the baseline reading is increased to 1 diopter. So we do a baseline reading topography and we repeat again after 6 months. And in after 6 month time, if you are seeing here, you will see the K max. So this is the K max. So from the baseline, if the K max in after 6 months in repeated scan, the K max has increased more than 1 diopter. So that shows that it is progressing. If the flat K is also, so either one, flat K or steep K, either one is progress more than 1 diopter means it's progressing. Mean keratometry is 0.75. So here, this is the mean one. Corneal apex power, manifest spherical refraction, corneal central thickness greater than 2% decrease from the baseline. So this is the criteria that has been used to decide whether the keratoconus is progressing or not. So coming to the complications of the CXL process. So like every process, there is also complication of CXL. So before going to those specific complication, so why this complication happens? So primarily the complication that we see in the CXL process is primarily due to the incorrect technique. Incorrect technique means incorrect use of UV radiation intensity. So someone has used a very high intensity like 40 milliwatt per centimeter square or 50 milliwatt per centimeter square, that could be very damaging for the endothelium, also for the lens also, crystalline lens. So it is primarily due to the incorrect technique application or incorrect patient's inclusion. You have included someone having corneal thickness less than 400, so that is also can cause complication. So this is the primary complication. Secondary complication reason could be secondary complication like infection. So one of the main secondary complication is the corneal ulcer. So that could be because of the BCL that has been putted after a CXL process. Poor hygiene, there could be some undiagnosed ocular surface disease like dry eye, blepharitis, which has been missed in a screening visit. So that can cause secondary complication. So specific those complications are the corneal haze. So corneal haze is the major complication of CXL. If you see corneal haze in about 70-80% patient who are going CXL, undergoing CXL. It is basically due to keratocyte loss during UV radiation process. But the thing is that corneal haze has been seen to resolve in 6 months to 1 year time. So with mild use of steroid. So there will be corneal haze in almost 60-70% of patients, but the good thing is that it will resolve over a period of time. There could be endothelial damage if the corneal thickness is less than 400 microns. There can be sterile infiltrate in the cornea because of the cell-mediated immunity. There could be a herpes reactivation of person who is having a dormant herpes, latent herpes. So it has been shown that UV radiation can reactivate latent herpes. Post-operative infection ulcer, it is one of the possibility always because we are removing the cornea epithelium. And the last could be the treatment failure complication. You did C3R, but after 1 year, you are seeing the keratoconus is still progressing. So that is a treatment failure. So this is the picture which is showing the corneal hedge. So this is the patient one. You are seeing a post-dense, ill-defined central corneal hedge. If you can focus at this area. The same patient at a 6-month visit. So you see the hedge is quite lessened. The intensity has been quite decreased. And in a 1-year time, it will be totally off. So whenever you're seeing a CXL patient with a corneal hedge, nothing to worry, because with the adequate treatment, it will go by its own. So how much effective is C3R? Having all things said and done. So is it effective? So studies have shown that it's quite effective. So like one study was showing that, so there is a study done in India in 2015 showing that CXL is effective about 91% in 32 eyes where they have did the CXL. So 91% means it's good efficacy. Like there are 10% chances of still failure of treatment, but 90% is a high effectivity. The other study which is done in the Germany, which is showing 98% effectivity. So other study that is kind of very recent, done in 2015. So it is showing that after C3R in a 1-year time, you'll see a flattening of the cornea. So they have seen in their study flattening of cornea about 0.35 diopter. So it is a randomized control trial. So in a control group, they have seen an increase of stiffening of the cornea, but those eyes which have undergone CXL, so there the cornea has become more flatter. And there are several studies which also have shown that after C3R, the cornea becomes flatter, but it takes time, 2 years, 3 years. So if you want to see the effect in 6-month time, you will not see that, because after C3R, in first 3 months, you will see more stiffening of the cornea. Then it will go to the flattening phase. So to conclude this talk, so apart from haze and stromal hyperdensity after CXL, with early or late onset, no other direct or primary complications of the procedure have been reported as such. Conventional CXL with irradiation of 9 milliwatt per centimeter square and accelerated CXL with irradiation of 18 milliwatts centimeter square showed better visual refractive and tomographic improvements at the end of 12 months. So we have discussed about the different process of CXL, different types. So almost like all the studies have shown that standard CXL is having better efficacy. But the only problem is that it is a more time consuming process. Almost all studies show CXL is effective in controlling keratoconus progression over the 2 or 3 years time period. But as I said at the beginning of my talk, like CXL is still very new technology. So still the full potential is yet to be realized. And CXL in children and adolescents should be performed as soon as the diagnosis has been made, because the chances of progression is very high in the children. So you want to catch in a very early age, because if the progression will be, because if there will be progression, there would be also thinning of the cornea. And once the cornea will become less than 400 microns, there is a difficulty in doing CXL. So that's all. We can take questions. So if people will not ask question, I have my learning objectives. I will ask question according to that from anyone.
So there's a different type of EP on or EP off. Is different between accelerated or is same as EP on or EP off?
EP on means you are not removing the epithelium. See, the main type is only 2 types. One is the standard or conventional. The second is the accelerated. In accelerated, you can have pulse, you can have epithelium on or transepithelial. So epithelial on means your epithelium is intact. You are not removing epithelium when you are doing C3R. Epithelium off means you are removing the epithelium. That is the like basic requirement of standard CX. You need to remove epithelium.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, Shushmita.
Sir, I have one question. As you have told that because of the incorrect, the complications of CXL was that while using incorrect technique of UV radiations, then there will be a lots of complications will be happen. So, what is the average UV radiation we have to take while doing this procedure?
Okay. So if you go in my conclusion slide, so means there are different protocols. Protocols means there are few things we decide protocol, like how much corneal thickness is. Second is which machine you are using and which technique you are using. Means whether you are using a standard or accelerated with pulse or transepithelium. The normal range for irradiation is 3 milliwatt to 18 milliwatt is the safer side per centimeter square. But it is like according to the surgeon decision who is doing, because there's several variables which are like coming into play.
Okay. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, you talked about demarcation line. So if the line is a little bit higher, then what we have? I mean, you said that deeper, if it is deeper in stroma, C3R is very effective.
Yes.
But if it is up, then what?
Okay. So this is a picture of. Okay. So here the demarcation line is more clear. So normally what we want like demarcation line, what does it shows? So if you see that this area which is below the demarcation line, the cornea is less reflective. And the cornea which is above the demarcation line, the cornea is more reflective. So more reflective is because it is treated with C3R or CXL. So normally it happens because in CXL, there are a lot of chemical change that happens. So if demarcation line is not, when you're doing treatment, CXL, the corneal thickness is 400 microns. 400 microns means when you are putting the UV radiation, normally those UV radiation will be penetrating up to the level of 340 or 350 microns. You use the irradiations in the same way that you don't want to penetrate that beyond that level. So we want it to penetrate at a stromal level, because in the stroma you want to make those because the collagen is in the stroma, and collagen will make the covalent bonds that make the cornea more stiffer. So if this demarcation line is not quite deep in the stroma, means your cornea would be not as stiffer as it should be after C3R or CXL treatment. But as I said, this is a debatable, like few researchers don't believe on this, but most of the like clinicians believe on this, that this demarcation line is an important clinical tool to basically assess the extent of treatment CXL. Got anything?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Hello, sir.
Yes. Yes.
Sir, my question is, as you told that the demarcation line is the sign that keratoconus is CXL is done in that eye. So, sir, it is very hard to diagnose that that demarcation line in a slit lamp. Is there any another way or any another sign?
Not any another sign. Demarcation line is the only sign. And it is not very hard. You can see very carefully in the straight line. And if you're not able to catch in the straight line, ASOCT, anterior segment OCT, like this picture is of anterior segment OCT. So definitely in anterior segment OCT, you will be able to see that. Anterior segment OCT, you even able to see this tear layer. You're seeing the topmost, this is the tear layer.
Okay.
So apart from that, there are no other as such clinical biomarkers by which you can like see.
Okay, sir.
And apart from that, there are other things like corneal biomechanics that you can check. Corneal biomechanics is again, you need different tool to check corneal biomechanics. So after C3R, the cornea would be more stiffer. That will show in the corneal biomechanics test. But that we'll discuss some another day.
Okay, sir.
Sir, as by this class we are able to understand that C3R is used in keratoconus, that is actinic condition. So can we use C3R? Does it is used in other actinic condition like after post LASIK surgeries and other things?
Yeah. So any ectasia because of natural ectatic condition like keratoconus, keratoglobus, PMCD, or because of some surgery like LASIK, PRK. So any ectatic condition to prevent the progression. Ectasia means the cornea is going to bulge out more over the period of time. So if the corneal thickness is less than 400 microns, so the surgeon can think of doing that, seeing the patient overall condition, like how much prone that patient is for progression. First, they want to see that in 1 year time, whether it is progressing or not. If it is not progressing, they will not do it. But if it is progressing, so CXL can be done.
Thank you.
Sir,
Sir.
I have a question.
Yes.
Sir, if we are putting that riboflavin drops through the stromal layer, it will goes in the endothelium na, by cellular space. It will cause some problem in endothelium.
No, it will not go into the endothelium because of the Bowman's Descemet's layer. So it will not penetrate there.
Okay.
And even if it penetrates, so riboflavin can penetrate. There is no problem with the riboflavin. There is a problem with UV radiation. You don't want to reach UV radiation to that level because UV radiation are the high energy radiations. And high energy means they will damage the normal well functioning cells. So riboflavin is not an issue. Even if reach to the endothelium or anterior chamber or iris, that is not any. Riboflavin is nothing but vitamin B2. So no issue.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so there are two questions in chat box. Can CXL be done in keratoglobus? Yes, it can be done because it is also ectatic disease, but slight difficult to do in keratoglobus. The reason is that keratoglobus you will see that thinning at the periphery, not in the center. So theoretically it can be done, but practically means for doing C3R you need to remove the epithelium, and your thinning is already beyond 9 millimeter in keratoglobus or at 9 millimeter area. So practically doing it would be very difficult, and the efficacy is also not. I have not come across any study which has been seen or studied the efficacy of CXL in keratoglobus. So to answer your question, theoretically it can be done, but practically not very useful. So normally they do not do. So all the peripheral ectatic diseases like keratoglobus or PMCD, they normally do have very poor prognosis in terms of like any surgical procedure. So that is the way. So one basic question, CAXL is being performed primarily to stop keratoconus progression and not for refractive stability. Yes, CXL is not for refractive stability. It is for to prevent the progression of keratoconus, to make cornea more stiffer so that it can withhold the pressure which is forcing or which is coming inside the eye. So you want to make a cornea more stiff so that it should not more bulge out or should not progress. Refractive stability, you can't say, but studies have shown that after C3R, cornea becomes more slightly flatter, and you will see a decrease in the K, uh, steep K, maximum K value. But refractive stability, that is hard to say, because the changes of C3R goes over 2-3 years time, so it keep on changing. In CXL, during epithelium removal, do they remove whole epithelium of some part of more area removal lead to more delayed epithelium? 9 mm area they remove. So 9 mm area they remove, and they put after completing of the CXL process, they put contact lens, bandage contact lens. So it is not like that they will take more time. The cornea will be like within a 1 week time, the cornea would be totally re-epithelialized. So 9 mm, because they want to like put that effect to the maximum zone. So 9 mm is the standard that I have seen in most of the study. Done? Okay, no any more questions? Now let me see how many of you have like completed my objectives. So coming to the second objective, who can tell me the types of cornea collagen cross-linking? Ayushi. Ayushi. Okay, Mahima.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, as you said, one is the traditional way and another is accelerated cross-linking procedure, which also constitutes like a pulsed cross-linking and
And transepithelial.
this transepithelial. And one LASIK extra also.
Okay, basic extra. Okay, so those are not for like keratoconus. Those are extra. Means we also can use C3R there also. Okay, good. Can anyone tell me about the like what is the like steps of the standard CXL process? Simple 3 steps that we have seen in the video.
So may I tell?
Yes.
So first step is to remove the epithelium layer.
Yes.
And the second is to put the riboflavin.
For how many times? For how much duration?
For after 2 minutes.
Every 2 minutes.
For 30 minutes. Every 2 minutes for 30 minutes.
Yes.
And the third and last step is after putting a riboflavin and then UV radiation.
Yes. So UV radiation for 30 minutes again with riboflavin at every 2 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Good. So who is going to say 5 complication of CXL process that we can see?
Can you say?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, Abhijit.
Sir, the complication are the corneal haze,
Yes.
the corneal haze,
Hmm.
endothelial damage, and sir, treatment and post-operative ulcer, and sir, herpes reactivation.
Okay. Okay, fine. So corneal haze is the most common. Least common are like corneal ulcer, failure of treatment, reactivation of herpes, in sterile infiltrate, all those things. What are the indication of CXL? Will you tell me? Indications. This is the most easiest one. Indication.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, there are three indications. The first is progressive keratoconus, the second is young age, and the third is management of corneal ectasia.
Okay, good. And anything like when we see that keratoconus is progressing, Ayushi?